It's a wild world out there, but some worlds are even wilder. Hi, I'm Tyler Habney, and you're listening to Dungeons and Dystopias. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome back to Dungeons and Dystopias. You already know who it is. I'm Tyler Habney, your producer. Welcome to episode 7, I believe. Today's episode is going to be about hit video game Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of people have already said a lot of things about Baldur's Gate 3, so I'm going to try to keep it unique as I can, offer my perspectives on things. More specifically, just kind of how the game's been developing, because a lot of people have been keeping track of necessarily, I guess, how Baldur's Gate is kind of growing and the sort of the effect it's had on the gaming atmosphere. So for those of you who don't know, Baldur's Gate 3 is obviously it's the sequel to Baldur's Gate 2. But Baldur's Gate is a series of Dungeons & Dragons games that take place within the Dungeons & Dragons setting of Forgotten Realms. For those who've listened to this podcast before, you'll recognize that I play a lot of games in the Forgotten Realms, so this is a setting that I tend to know a bit about and am pretty interested in. So, it all centers around the city of Baldur's Gate. It'd be kind of weird if it didn't. But Baldur's Gate is this port city off the Sword Coast in the Forgotten Realms that is not necessarily known for being a great place to live. In fact, the crime rate in Baldur's Gate is pretty bad. Generally, Baldur's Gate has a bit of a problem with pirates, cultists, thieves. Generally, anything bad, I believe Baldur's Gate likely has it somewhere within the confines of its walls. There's a story about this is a funny little Ed Greenwood, the creator of Forgotten Realms, tidbit here. But as he tells it, there is a legend of buried treasure in Baldur's Gate. But really, what it actually is, it's buried treasure. And treasure is a dragon. So adventurers, if they ever find this quote unquote buried treasure, it's going to be a bit of a surprise. But, Baldur's Gate, very, very interesting city. For the first two Baldur's Gate games, you actually go and spend a lot of time in the actual city of Baldur's Gate, pretty early on. In Baldur's Gate 3, that is not the case. You don't go to the actual city of Baldur's Gate until, the end of the game, which is pretty neat turnaround, because it does allow you to sort of build up a lot of experience with the area around the Forgotten Realms and the River Cheonthar and areas like that. And really, it's not even a ton of area. I think we did the math, and all of Baldur's Gate 3 takes place in like a 200-mile radius tops. It's a very it's not a large stretch of area compared to the rest of the Forgotten Realms. So it's I don't know. It's just an interesting little game. And I'm going to be talking to you guys a bit about it and my experiences with it, because I have been following Baldur's Gate 3 since it released in early access. Baldur's Gate 3, by the way, developed by Larian Studios. The original two Baldur's Gate were developed by BioWare, I believe. They who did the Dragon's Quest game or Dragon Age games and stuff like that. So they're kind of their own RPG powerhouses. But Baldur's Gate 2, that was the last one for like 20 years. And then Larian came along and they got the rights to Dungeons and Dragons through Wizards of the Coast, and they made a video game out of it. And what they did was they changed, they took the 5th edition rule system. And they tried to gamify it, which, for those who were listening a few episodes ago, I had a guest on, my friend Cam, who is a professional game master, and he mentioned that gamifying 5e is just impossible. Like, straight up, A lot of the different philosophies that exist between video games and tabletop games tend to make writing for that kind of experience a difficult task. Luckily, I think the people at Larian came pretty close. Baldur's Gate 3 has so many different ways you can engage with any given situation that it almost feels like they've accounted for just about every choice a player could possibly make at a given time. And then there's also just sort of this combination of different systems and things that do create instances where you can solve a situation by just being at the right place at the right time and being smart with your movements. Pushing people in this game in Baldur's Gate 3 is a very common tactic. If you can manage to get your opponent near a cliff and you succeed on a shove check, guess what? They're falling down that cliff and they're probably going to die. And you can do entire fights like that because they're so good about setting up little things for you to exploit in the battlefield. And that's part of that feeling of freedom that is pretty much iconic for Dungeons and Dragons when played on a tabletop role-playing system. Which, I mean, that's because you've got a dungeon master who can react and change things sort of on the fly to kind of fit the vibes or the wishes of the party. But when it comes to a video game, I mean, obviously, you can't just add things depending on whether or not a player thinks something should happen. So you have to anticipate every little possible thing they could or might want to do in that situation. And I mean, if you can design something for it, you do. And then eventually some player on Reddit tries this extremely obscure little action you might have anticipated them doing, and now it looks like your game is way more detailed than it might actually be. And that's, I mean, that's a lot of Baldur's Gate 3. They play a lot of those neat little magic tricks that really sort of capture you in on, what's going on. So, I mean, this isn't a review of Baldur's Gate 3. This is more than anything, it's a ramble. But whether or not I would suggest the game, yes, absolutely. I won Game of the Year, so it's genuinely a very good time. So let's actually talk a bit more about the actual content of Baldur's Gate 3 and a little bit of the story in the background, because, I mean, we all know what it is by this point. It's a very good game. You should play it. But, what happens? What happens in Baldur's Gate? Well, the original Baldur's Gate followed this guy called Sarevok, which you didn't play Sarevok. Sarevok's the bad guy. And he had this huge goal to basically become like the last ball spawn. And ball spawn, they are the children, effectively, of the god of murder, Baal. That's Bhaal. In D&D lore, Baal dies sometime during 3.5 edition, but they bring all of these gods back in 5th edition in a thing called the Second Sundering. And that becomes important later. So Sarevok, he is a Baal spawn, and it turns out, guess what? So is the player. So the player is pitted against Sarevok by fate. That's pretty much it. It's just who they were born to, who they are, has made it so that they are on Sarevok's list of people they need to kill so they can absorb, the player's power. And Baldur's Gate 1 kind of follows that sort of godly, fate line, through line. Baldur's Gate 2 directly follows Baldur's Gate 1 after Sarevok is slain. And that one is a little crazier. But that one ends with you basically trying to usurp Baal. And I think that, if I remember, you have a couple choices on how to do that. The canonical one is not, you do not take Baal's place. But after that, Baal dies somewhere in D&D lore, in 3.5 edition. And then Baldur's Gate kind of just goes quiet for 20 years until 5th edition, when the Second Sundering happens. Hey, there it is again. So the Second Sundering is all of these dead gods that died during the Time of Troubles, or 3.5 edition, They come back, and well, a lot of them want their old spaces back. But thing is, Baal has been replaced by Cyric, the god of lies. I believe I might have mentioned him in my Dale Lands episode. So if you want to hear more about Cyric, you can probably find that there. But Cyric has sort of taken over a lot of Baal's area, Baal's court. Haha. But that sort of created a problem for Baal, because now he doesn't exactly, he's like a demigod. He's not exactly the same level of power that he was before, which for someone who's psychotic and insane and hell-bent on power is pretty rough. So Baal's back, and that means, guess what? So are all of his neat little followers, his cultists. And they just love the city of Baldur's Gate. It's just one of their favorite places on all of the Forgotten Realms. So, hey, it's time for a Baldur's Gate 3. Baal is back, baby. The Dead 3. It's not just Baal. It's Baal, Bane, and Myrkul. Bane being the god of tyranny, or ex-god of tyranny, I believe once again replaced by Cyric. And then there is Myrkul, who is the god of undeath, or god of death, one of the two. But Myrkul, he was replaced not by Cyric, but by someone Cyric really hates, named Kelemvor. And Kelemvor is a character that has a ton of lore. Same with Cyric. They were like ex-adventuring buddies before they became gods. It's a whole story. There's like 3 novels about this. So I'd suggest you go out and find those and read them. I believe one of them is Prince of Lies, and then I forget what the other 2 are called, but they're part of a series. Really good. I'd get into that if you're into D&D lore at all. Aside from that, Baal, Bane, and Myrkul, they're back. And not to spoil too much about Baldur's Gate 3, but they've got some plans set into motion that have to do with an entity called the Absolute. I'm not going to tell you anything about the Absolute because I want you to play the game, but I can tell you the Absolute will be your through line through the whole game. That is, you're trying to either stop, join, or maybe even take over for the Absolute and rule in the Absolute's place. But basically, the Absolute is this newfangled god that's kind of hitting the scene, that all these goblins and gnolls and all these crazy creatures they're starting to worship, because who knows? I mean, there are these absolute priests that are showing up everywhere. They're all drow elves and underdark creatures and stuff like that. And a lot of the first half of the game, like legitimately, I think just about the first half of the game. No, it's like the first 2/3 of the game is just trying to figure out what's going on with this Absolute. What is the Absolute? And the reveal that comes at the end of Act 2, which, spoiler alert, the reveal comes at the end of Act 2. They lay down enough groundwork to where it really blows your mind. I think it's one of the greatest sort of story unraveling moments that has happened in recent RPG history that at least comes to my recollection. Genuinely, the first time through Baldur's Gate 3, when I reached the end of Act 2, my jaw like hit the floor. I was so pumped. I couldn't even believe what I was seeing. But generally, after Act 2, after you've had basically everything finally revealed to you, that's when they finally hit you with, hey, now it's time to go to Baldur's Gate. And Baldur's Gate is so detailed. They have so many things there to do that it's wild. I don't know the best way to describe it. It's just like, it feels like they put so much effort into the city itself, and compared to everything else you've just done, it's like, I don't know, man. They just give you so much to work with. And on top of that, I mean, this is just, we're talking about the main story. There are so many side stories, and pre-made characters or characters that you can have in your party that also have their own detailed stories. Like each and every one of them has different beats and people they can talk to that will unravel their own personal character story, which means that for each playthrough, depending on what party you have, you could be seeing completely different things kind of happening to these characters, or you could have conversations you never had with these characters before because you're actually giving them some bit of attention. Now, talking about the cultural impact of Baldur's Gate 3, obviously I mentioned it had won a Game of the Year award, but beyond that, it is being seen, I think, as one of the best games of all time, generally. One of the best RPGs, at least. It brought back the CRPG genre, which is the computer role-playing game genre, which is created in a time when console role-playing games are more JRPG focused and computer role-playing games are top-down, had a lot more things you had to keep track of. It was more Western. You get the idea. But that style of play kind of died down for a while. And then Baldur's Gate 3 came back and proved that it could be extremely successful, so long as it's a good game. Which, I mean, in my opinion, a lot of CRPGs do tend to be pretty decent in terms of writing. Sometimes their mechanics can feel a bit jank, but that's usually because most CRPGs are very old. Some of the characters from Baldur's Gate 3 have gone on to have sort of an identity of their own. Anyone who's spent enough time around the internet by this point has seen enough Asterion art to probably last a lifetime. People love Asterion. If you don't know who that is, just Google him, and I mean, you'll figure out. He's just a vampire guy, but I mean, I think he's popular for the same reason Twilight was popular, if you know what I mean. So I guess final thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3. Generally, I would suggest it. I'm excited to see what happens in the future. I know Larian has said they're not really interested in doing D&D again, mostly because working with Wizards of the Coast is rough in this day and age, from what I've heard. And then who knows what Wizards of the Coast is going to do? But as I've seen, the voice actors are all willing to go back to those characters and keep playing them. So hopefully this isn't going to be the last time we hear from the cast of Baldur's Gate 3. And now I'd like to move on to our final segment today, where I'm going to talk to you guys about a D&D monster. And today, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the Duergar. So Duergar are otherwise known as deep dwarves or rock dwarves or whatever you want to call them. They are dwarves who live under the ground. It's crazy. They have gray skin, white hair. They also come with the ability, and this is one of the sort of things that makes them stand out. They can make themselves grow. They can grow in like double the size as just a part of their race. And that often leads to some interesting situations with when fighting Duergar, because I mean, it's just a dwarf to start, but then they grow and their damage increases and things get a little bit more dangerous. So Duergar society is somewhat slave-based. They worship Ledugwer, which is a god that is known for slavery. And so one of the main, core components of Duergar culture is that sort of usage of how that works and how they get those workers. So yeah, that already puts them in a position to be pretty decent enemies to your party, because I mean, if your party looks capable, looks like good workers, there's a chance, so a Duergar raiding party might stop and try something. They typically don't deal too well with a lot of other races. obviously with the people in the Underdark, and sometimes people from the surface can set up trade routes with Dwergar. But a lot of it is obviously looking a little bit more towards sort of an isolationist sort of culture. But they do have a lot of really cool places. Gracklstugh is a well-known Ledugware city that has a large furnace within it, and that furnace is, of course, is fueled by a dragon. And this dragon is named Themberchaud. And if you're interested in seeing some of Themberchaud, watch the D&D movie. The big fat dragon that shows up, that's him. Don't know why he's moved from Gracklstugh to whatever city they put him in. But yeah, I guess they did. Lore-wise, don't know how that happened. It hasn't exactly been explained to us, but it happened, and he's there in the D&D movie. So if you're interested in that, interested in seeing a little bit of connection to Gracklstugh and Dwergar lore, it's pretty easy to see. Anyways, I think that'll be it for us today. I've yapped long enough. So thank you so much for listening. This has been Dungeons and Dystopias. I'll see you next week.